So I've been working on the 360 for the 1968 Dodge Dart, and we ran into a couple of problems. Well, not really problems so much, but complications, we'll call them. So you'll notice that this is the early style LA water pump, and the reason we've done that is directly above me in the attic is a freshly recored, correct 1968 340 Dart rad. With the original 91 timing cover and later style water pump, we wouldn't have been able to use that rad because the outlets would be on the wrong side. So that was a problem. So I found this one up at National Moparts after digging around a little bit, and I put this timing cover on. Now, that being said, naturally I ran into another problem almost immediately, and that is, it's hard to see, but with the balancer sucked into where it's supposed to be here, it actually will contact the bottom of the water pump here. Now, this is a correct 360 balancer for this engine. So what I've done is I've marked it, and I'm going to end up having to clearance the bottom of the water pump just a little bit so that we can actually pull the balancer in the rest of the way. So I'll pull the balancer back off, and I guess we'll clearance it a bit here, and then we'll give it a shot again. So with that clearanced a little bit, we now have lots of space for our balancer, which is good. So moving on, we can now go ahead and put the oil pan back on. What I was going to do here is, one, I got to come through here and tap all these holes back flat again. And then what we're going to do is, instead of the cork gaskets, we're going to use the late model style one-piece steel reinforced gasket that you would find on a Magnum engine. Now, for those of you not in the know, the Magnum V8s, the 318 and 360, they use the same size mains as a 360 LA. So if you're building a 360 LA, you can use a 360 or 318 Magnum oil pan gasket, and vice versa if you want to put a Magnum engine in the place of an LA. So that's actually a project I'm going to do at some point. I'll be putting a 318 Magnum in my 69 Fury convertible, and in order to do so I needed a 360 LA car pan. So anyway, I'll get that cleaned up and ready to go here, and we'll put that back together. Okay, one of the things that's kind of bugged me since I did the heads, I put the valve rotators back in on the exhaust valves, which is kind of a truck thing, right? So the whole idea is it just keeps the exhaust valves slowly rotating every time they open, so that you don't end up with burnt valves. That's the whole idea of it. But with aftermarket valve springs and stuff, I got thinking about it, and it kept bugging me. So I rated a set of just normal retainers out of a set of number 302 casting 318 heads I had. So that's what we're working on right now, is swapping those over. So basically, if you've never seen an overhead valve removal tool, this is the one that's meant for on-vehicle service. So you crank it down on, right? And then you have to apply air in order to hold the cylinder under pressure, right? So basically what happens is your air essentially acts like compression, holds the valve shut. You can remove your valve spring and your valve will not drop in. Then you can do whatever you have to do and put it back together. I usually run the regulator that I have over here in line so that I can only put about 50 psi into the cylinder. You know, you're not going to hurt it to run full compressor pressure, but at the same time, you know, why bother? So anyway, let's do that. Okay, that's one head done. So what I'll do is I'll finish the other side up and then we'll move on. Okay, so anywhere on our heads where there's coolant, we put a little bead, and then at the corners we put a little bead here. And we'll glue down our end gaskets, and we'll put just a little bit of silicone in the same spots on our intake manifold. And then we can install it. The bolts get torqued to 45 foot-pounds. Okay, so with the intake sitting in place, next thing we're going to do is torque it all up. Okay, so our manual says 45 foot-pounds for our intake. And obviously we cannot really properly get ourselves on here to these inside intake manifold bolts, and those are the first ones we torque. So you can buy these sockets. I've had this one for quite a while. I actually was given it years and years ago when I was an apprentice, and it works perfect for this. And as long as we keep everything here 90 degrees, we are well within what we need to be. Okay. All right. Now we'll switch to a socket and we'll finish torquing all these. You might want a deep socket actually. Okay, it's our intake torqued. Okay, so I've got this one on here. fully assembled, but I want to talk about a few things with the rocker arms and rocker arm shafts. First thing is first on them. There is a notch on one end of the rocker shaft that goes to your right and faces down always, regardless of which side of the engine you're on, goes to the right and down. Because if we take one of those guys off there and I roll it over, see the oiling hole is there. By putting that to the right and down, it puts the oil hole in the right spot for the rockers, so it keeps them oiled. Now the next thing is, obviously they're marked left and right, so when you assemble them they got to be in the right orientation, right? And if for whatever reason they're not marked, it's pretty easy to tell. If you have a left, the push rod is always offset. So a left will have the push rod to the left side, a right will have the push rod to the right side. And by doing so, that centers all your push rods. And it also ensures that it's touching the tip of the valve all the way along, right? They get torqued to 200 inch-pounds. And when you go to tighten them, what I usually do is I snug them up by hand about a quarter turn at a time. And I go in here and I grab a hold of the push rods as I go along, and I make sure that they're in the ball end, so you can feel them in there, right? So that way they're not popped out, because I bent a push rod once because I wasn't checking that. And I put it all together like this, and usually as I assemble an engine, I rotate the engine over by hand and listen and feel, because you'll know if something's binding or not. And when I did that, I heard a twang sound, and sure enough, I bent a push rod. So just things to be mindful of. All right, so one of the things you have to do if you're going to put this engine in an A body is install a 90-degree adapter. So these were installed on quite a few applications actually. Everything that I have with a small block, I put them on because you can angle them so that you can put them where your filter, basically wherever you want, right? Because you can kind of rotate them around and stuff like that. And personally, I like that. So we have to get this on here. And what I quickly realized was when I was digging through the parts that Mark had, we were missing all of this stuff. Now the good part about that is you can purchase this kit from, I got it from Mancini. I'm sure other Mopar retailers have it as well. So we can go ahead and install that. So installation of it's pretty straightforward. I mean, there's the instructions right there. So you can see there's two washers. This is our through bolt, which is drilled, of course, so the oil gets through it. There's our gasket, and that goes on our block. Okay, that's it installed and torqued, and I've thrown on my painting oil filter. For an A body, usually you want them tilted just a little bit like that. Okay, so in preparation for priming the oiling system, I've taken the valve covers, I put the gaskets on them, and I've just kind of thrown them in place just to keep from having any splash from the oil. Put a plug in for where the dipstick goes, because the dipstick I have is not the right one. So we got to take a trip up to National Moparts and get the right one. And what I've been doing is I have been putting a few quarts of BR30 break-in oil. So this is what I've been using for probably the last couple engines I've done anyway. I've had good luck with it. I'll have to get a few more quarts though. Okay, so we're going to prime the oiling system. So we have an oil pump priming rod, which goes down into the oil pump without our distributor gear installed. You're going to need a electric drill. You could probably do it with a cordless, but I've never tried it with a cordless. I got this old auto meter gauge, and I've got it plumbed into one of the oil galleries so I can see how much oil pressure we have. I've put 5 quarts of oil in it, and I just have the valve cover sitting here to keep from, try to prevent some of the splash. You're going to need to know which way The distributor rotates in your engine because that is the correct rotation for the oil pump. The last engine I did was a 440, so they're reverse rotation because the oil pump drive is at the front of the engine. This one, of course, is regular, so it goes clockwise. So what we'll do is we'll let our okay. There's 60 pounds oil pressure. Okay, what we'll do now is we'll pop the covers off quick, and we'll have a quick look and see if oil got to the top end. And yeah, we got lots of oil to the top end. So that's a good sign. Let me go around and check the other side. We didn't get much to this side, but that means we need to rotate the crankshaft to line up the oiling holes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bolt this valve cover down now, and then we'll rotate the crank and run the drill again. Okay, now that we have oil pressure and the oil staying in the engine, our next step is going to be to mask up the engine. We're going to finish priming it, and we're going to get it ready for paint.